When I was growing up, one of the things I liked to do was keep a page in my scrapbook for every grade of school. And because I did this, I can tell you that the very first time I received pre-approval for a credit card was in 4th grade. And I had the letter in my scrapbook to prove it. Now, obviously, it is preposterous for a 10 or 11-year-old to have a credit card, and I suspect that they wouldn't have really approved me had I filled out the paper and sent it back in. Hopefully my birth year would have raised some alarm with the company. But that just goes to show how willing banks and lenders are to get anyone and everyone into unwise financial situations. Because it's lucrative for them, even if it's devastating for us. Now, those of you who have been here for the last couple weeks have probably picked up that our emphasis for this month is stewardship. Stewardship of our whole life and every resource available to us, including our time and our talents and our treasure. In the first week, we talked about stewardship as an act of surrendering our whole life to God and not wasting the one wild and precious life that God has given us on anything less than God. And last week we talked about money and how the way we spend our money reveals our priorities, how it reveals what we love. And this week we're going to talk about money again, but from a different angle. Now I want to say up front that I know, believe me, I know, because I feel that it is uncomfortable to talk about money, especially in church. And there's some good reason for that. Some pastors and religious institutions have been manipulative, and they have preyed on people's desire to honor God with their money, and they did that so that they could line their own pockets. And that is flat out wrong, that is sinful, and I am confident that God will have something to say about that when those pastors and leaders stand before him, and that is absolutely not what we are about in this church. Can we get an amen on that? Yeah. But here's the other part of that. Money is the number one stressor for American adults. The number one. It's the number one thing married couples fight about. In fact, a couple with $10,000 in debt and no savings is twice as likely to divorce as a couple with $10,000 in savings and no debt. And it's not just marriages. Financial struggles are tied to nearly 40% of suicides in Americans over 40. And half of Americans have less than $25,000 in savings for retirement, which we all know does not go very far. And so we have senior citizens who are having to make choices between whether they buy their medication or their food, which means our financial situations are literally killing us. And consider this. The average credit card debt has tripled since 1990, tripled in 30 years. And most of those credit cards have such high interest rate that you could stop using it today and just pay the minimum payment, and you would never retire that debt because you're just paying interest. And people are getting upside down in car loans and mortgages. The loans are extended out so far that they end up owing more than the house or car is even worth. And then there's trying to figure out how you're going to pay for your kids' college, or how you're going to pay back your own college. That's the boat we're in. Being able to afford medical care that we need, or we face illnesses or natural disasters, disability, layoffs, divorces. The list of financial tragedies can go on and on. Aren't you so glad you're here today for this uplifting message? But all of these financial woes make money the greatest source of anxiety in Americans today. And if we aren't willing to talk about one of the biggest things in our lives in the church, then what are we even doing? Because the making of our money, the saving of our money, the spending of our money, the not having enough of our money is what keeps us awake at night. And we need to talk about those things as part of the family of God. But more importantly, we should never be silent on something that the Bible isn't silent on. Now, there are actually books of the Bible that we refer to as wisdom literature. And their purpose is to teach us how to live well in God's good world. It teaches us how to be responsible managers and good stewards of the money that God has entrusted to us. And as the sermon title denotes, it teaches us how to get our stewardship together. How many of you thought I was going to have another word there? How to get our stewardship together. Financial struggle is not a new thing or particular to our modern American context. One of the most famous parables that Jesus ever told, a story which displays the endless love and faithfulness of God our Father, is about someone who got into trouble with money. The young man that we refer to as the prodigal son. Now, until last year, I actually thought that prodigal meant someone who was really sinful, who left their family and did really dumb, sinful, bad things. But prodigal actually means to spend money recklessly, to be extravagant in our wastefulness. We don't call the young man of Luke 15 a prodigal because he had loose morals or left his family. He's a prodigal because he wasted his money. And the truth is, there's a bit of a prodigal in each of us. We all have room to grow in our responsible financial stewardship, so that we don't have to live with that ever-present anxiety about money, so that we aren't adding to the stress of marriages when, frankly, marriage is already hard enough, so that we don't have to fear being reliant on the generosity of others, but instead can be freed to do the things that God calls us to do so that we can be the generous ones in life. So let's jump in and learn some of the wisdom that the Bible offers us on how to be responsible managers of the money God has entrusted to us. So the first two verses I want to point out come from the book of Proverbs, which is one of those wisdom books. Proverbs 27:23 says, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds." Proverbs 21:5, "The plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty." So if we are going to be responsible managers of our money, then we have got to have a plan. We need to know what we have, what we owe, and what we need so that we can plan accordingly. And I know that there are some financial accounting people in this room, and you're sitting there thinking, duh. And yes, it is an obvious thing. And yet, many of us, perhaps even most of us, don't do it regularly. I will go ahead and confess that when RC and I took the Dave Ramsey class last year, the Financial Peace University, we undershot our debt significantly, like by $50,000, okay? So now y'all are all worried about my financial situation. We have a plan, I promise. Okay, so sometimes you can be a perfectly intelligent person who is trying their best and still not be doing those common sense things. We need to have a plan. We need to know what we have, what we owe, and what we need. And we have to do this really, really novel thing called a budget. Say budget with me. Budget. It's the sexiest word you've ever heard, I know. But it is the first and most obvious way that we can be responsible with our money. To each month, sit down and calculate how much we're going to make, how much our bills are. And if you're married, it needs to be done together. And my husband's probably laughing because I hate these conversations. I hate it. I like it when he handles the money because he does a good job and I don't have to think about it and I can just spend it. That sounds great, doesn't it? Except that sometimes when I'm doing that, I'm spending money that needs to be spent somewhere else. Or I don't know how much debt we have by $50,000. We have to be doing these together. Because frankly, it's not fair for one person to carry that whole burden. And because we need to be a team. If we're married, we need to be doing it as a team. Again, this is common sense, but it really works. Especially when we create a budget with the most important things at the top. Now for us, we learned that that needs to be tithing. Because we found that if we did not make tithing the first line item in our budget, then we gave from our leftovers, which God deserves more than that. Things like our mortgages, our car payments, our food, those basic needs, those are the important things that go at the top. And then at the bottom, after we take care of our needs and our debt and our saving, then at the bottom, that's where we put the things we want. And you guys already know that for me, that's Netflix. But the reason it's at the bottom is because I can cut that if I need to. I might feel like I'm dying, but I will not die if I lose access to every episode of West Wing. Okay, so we put those things that are less important for our life on the bottom, because those are the things that are on the chopping block, and the things on the top are the ones that are really important. Does any of this sound complicated? Not a rhetorical question. Does any of it sound complicated? But is it hard? Yes. It is hard. It requires some discipline. But the good news is that discipline, by definition, is a training process. And so while it is really hard in the beginning, we can form into a habit, and so it doesn't become as hard anymore. And if we are diligent in our budgeting, then it enables us to plan for long-term things like retirement, or being able to take that dream vacation one day and pay for it outright, or to be generous and give to those in need, or to leave a legacy for our family when we're gone. Those are good things. But in order to do those things, we have to plan for it. Financial stability doesn't happen on accident. It just doesn't. And so as we get our stewardship together, we also need to listen to the Bible's wisdom about debt and savings. So some passages from Proverbs. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. Ouch. This is from Romans 13:8, let no debt remain outstanding except the debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. And back to Proverbs from chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food at harvest. So if we are going to be wise financial stewards, debt is not our friend. And I say that as someone who has a lot of student loan debt, who understands as well as anyone that the borrower is the slave to the lender. Now, we do have a plan to repay that, so my anxiety is diminished. But the reality is that I and anyone else who has a lot of debt, we are less free because of it. Now, there may be times to take a loan. A mortgage is a really good thing to take a loan out for, sometimes education. But most of the time, we're using credit for things that we don't have to use credit for, that we shouldn't be relying on credit for. I mean, how many of us have pulled out a credit card for Christmas gifts? Be honest. Yeah. Some of you guys are wise. You did better than I thought on that one. But we spend how many months paying off the gifts that we gave to celebrate Jesus' birthday? Jesus' birthday. Not my birthday. Not my kid's birthday. Jesus' birthday. Do we think Jesus would want us to go into debt to celebrate his birthday? There's something a little off about that. And theology aside, Christmas comes at the same time every year. We can prepare for it. So what if instead of putting Christmas gifts on our credit card and paying it off for 6 months, we took the 6 months before Christmas and set aside just a little bit of money, and then we're reasonable in our gift giving, and then we didn't have to waste money after the fact paying off those gifts with interest? The main way we avoid credit is to plan ahead and save accordingly. And I love that proverb about ants. It's kind of a kick in the gut. It even calls us sluggards. But ants are these tiny, unintelligent creatures with brains the size of a pin tip. And even they have figured out that they have to save up for winter. We know expenses will come up. If you own a car, you don't have to question whether your car will break down. At some point, your car will break down and need to be in the shop. At some point, you will have to replace those tires. At some point, you're going to get sick and you're going to need to be able to pay that copay at urgent care. The list can go on and on. It's not if something happens, it's when something happens. We know we need some reserves so that when those incidentals come up, We can pay for it. And we don't have to be in grief and anxiety trying to figure out how we're going to pay for our kid's antibiotic. If we have that money in savings, we can be prepared for it. And that is the number one way that we experience freedom in our finances. So we are applying biblical wisdom to our stewardship. We're making a plan. We're doing those awesome, exciting budgets every month, and we're avoiding debt and saving as well as we can. All of this is great, isn't it? It's awesome. It's exciting. But there's a barrier that stands between us actually being successful with this in theory, and that barrier is that we need to stop buying junk. I mean, let's be real. It's okay to buy things we need. It's okay to buy things that we want. But how many of us are buying stuff that we don't really need or even want? Have you ever cleaned out your closet and found a garment with tags still on it? Yes. Have you ever gone to the store for a little container of sour cream and then you leave Meijer with like 28 things in your cart? Yes. We all do this all the time. And sometimes you see something, oh, I really do need milk. Okay. But sometimes we're buying things that we just don't need and that we discover we really don't even want or enjoy all that much. And all that stuff stands between us and financial freedom. It stands between us and the capacity to be generous. Because if there's no margin in your budget, if you spend every single penny that comes in to your bank account every month, then you will never have anything left over to be a blessing to other people. And that is a barrier in our spiritual life as well as just our regular financial, everyday living health. So we need to stop buying all that junk. Proverbs 21:20 says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." And Proverbs 14:29, "Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is impulsive displays folly." Now, I know that I have been changed by Amazon Prime. And if something is not at my door in 2 days, I feel like there's a problem. Yeah, I see. You're with me. It's true. I ordered something a week and a half ago, and it's still not here. Oh. But you know what? That's ridiculous. Let's just call ourselves out. That's ridiculous to not be able to wait more than 2 days for something. It's actually a spiritual discipline to practice patience. I want this nice thing, whatever that might be. Okay, I can have that, but I'm going to save my money for it, and then when I have it, I'll really enjoy it, and it'll be something worth having. And we have lost that ability to do that, and that's a problem. It's a problem for our bank accounts, and it's a problem for our souls. We just have to think before we buy. Think about whether or not we really need something, yes, but ask ourselves, do I even really want this thing? And that practice alone is a huge step forward in faithful financial stewardship. As you've heard these words already a couple times today, John Wesley encouraged Methodists to earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And the truth is, we can't give all that much if we haven't earned, if we haven't planned, and if we haven't saved. Prodigals, people who are extravagant in their wastefulness, don't get the blessing of being a blessing to other people. I'll say that again. Prodigals don't get the blessing of being the blessing to other people. If we are wasteful with our money, we will never get to be generous with our money. So I just want to leave us with an illustration I heard, I think in my Dave Ramsey class. He tells a story about a fairly wealthy couple who were at their church, and the husband comes in and he sees his wife talking to a woman who sits on their pew every week. And this young woman, she's a single mom, and she's crying. And the husband kind of sees they're having a moment, and so he goes over to see what the problem is. And the young mom tells how her electricity is about to be turned off. And she doesn't have the money to pay the bill. And she's got these kids, and she's not being wasteful with her money. She just doesn't have enough to make things stretch with all the expenses and trying to do it on her own. And so that couple leave that day, and they call the electric company. And they don't just pay what she owes, but they put enough money on her account to cover her electric bill for the next year. And I heard that story, thought, that's it. That's the kind of thing I want to be able to do. I mean, who doesn't want to be able to be generous like that? But the hard truth is that I couldn't do that no matter how much I wanted to. Because I am not financially free enough to do that. And I suspect that some of you are sitting in that same spot where you think, man, I would love to be able to give that way, to be generous that way, but I couldn't do it either. But maybe one day I can. Because if I actually obey God's word, if I implement the wisdom that he has offered to me, and take the steps we know we ought to take, then maybe there is a day when I will be financially free enough to be able to do that for other people. And that's the whole point. Talking about money, especially in the church, it's not just about being rich, right? It's really not about being rich. But it is about being free. Free from the anxiety that money causes, free from the burdens that not having enough causes, and most importantly, free to be as generous to other people as God is to us. Because generosity is a quality of God that he calls his disciples to walk in as well. And so my prayer for us is that we would think very seriously about our financial situation. And there are resources if you want to go in further, but think seriously about your finances, especially for those of us who are closer to my age and can maybe do a little more to change our financial situation in the long run. And to think about, what can I do to be a faithful steward of what God has given me so that I can be as generous to other people as God has been to me, to be the blessing. Let's pray. God, money is such a tricky thing. It's uncomfortable to think about, it's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's really uncomfortable when we know we're not in good financial shape. And so, Lord, I pray that you would be with all of us who seek to follow you. That we would be disciples who surrender not just our time to you or our talent to you, but also our treasure, and that we obey your word. That we would be wise, that we would be diligent, that we would not be wasteful, so that we can be free to be all that you call us to be, so that we can be free to be generous. And God, we admit that we can't do that on our own, because even though it's not complicated, it is hard. And so we pray for your power to work in us and make us able to do the things and be the people that you are calling us to be as followers of Jesus. And we pray all those things in his beautiful and holy name. Amen.